Day one of the NFL's free agency, it is in the books, and there have been some massive moves made already. I'm going to dig into the top 10 most impactful ones and look at how they impact fantasy football for 2025 and beyond. Help you decide what you want to do with these players this year. Number 10, Chris Godwin. Godwin, once again, he goes back to the Bucs. Once again, the Bucs keep everyone at home. Last year, it was Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield just before the deadline. This year, it's Chris Godwin. Godwin was in unreal form before he dislocated his left ankle last year. He was second in receiving yards per game, weeks 1 to 7, averaged 8.9 targets per game, career high 7.1 receptions per game, had 5 touchdowns in those 7 games. That's as many as he had in the previous 2 seasons combined. This move, it really helps Baker Mayfield. It definitely helps Mike Evans as well, because there's somebody reliable taking attention near the line of scrimmage. It's probably not amazing news for Jalen McMillan, but I'd still expect him to carry on a good upward sort of trend. It's dreadful news, though, for every other team who was really hoping that Chris Godwin would make it to free agency, because he was by far the best free agent left out there. Number 9, Javonte Williams. It is only a 1-year, $3 million deal for Javonte Williams going to Dallas Cowboys, and that is not a massive amount of money whatsoever, but there's still some significance to this move. We know the Cowboys love to lean on their running game. We know that Brian Schottenheimer, the new Cowboys head coach, he's talked about wanting shifty running backs. And that might not be Javonte. So if people are getting suckered into this move, I think you've got to be wary, because Williams ranked 37th out of 37 qualifying running backs in yards after contact per attempt in 2024. He was bottom 5 among qualified running backs in yards per carry, EPA per attempt, rushing success rate. At this point in his career, he is a good pass blocker and a good receiving back, but he's not a great runner. So while this move is interesting, its biggest impact might come in what other moves they make. Rico Dowdle probably not returning to the Cowboys from everything we've heard so far. If you ask me, this means that the Cowboys are nailed on to take a running back fairly high in this draft, because they're going to need some investment to get a good running game if Javonte Williams is all they've got. Number 8, Davante Adams goes back to the West Coast and goes to the Rams. The Rams got this deal done before free agency opened up. Adams was cut by the Jets ahead of time. And this is a great move for all who are involved. Adams, he showed last year that he's not completely washed, and he shined at times. Despite Aaron Rodgers being up and down and his play being erratic at best, the Jets, they weren't a good environment for fantasy football, but Davante Adams, he just kept getting it done. And one area I think he can get it done for the Rams is in the red zone. He's a truly elite red zone option. That's not necessarily something we can say about Puka Nacua at this point in his career. Nacua, he did have 3 red zone touchdowns last year, and they were his only touchdowns. He's just not a great touchdown scorer. He's only had 9 in 2 seasons, despite all the receptions he's had. Meanwhile, Davante Adams consistently has been good in that area, and while he's lost speed in his game, he still has enough savvy to win when things get tighter in that sort of box in that final 20 yards. The move, it's also really impactful for the Rams, because this was the exact same amount of money that they were going to pay Cooper Kupp. $46 million, which averages out to like $23 million a year. So if they don't want to pay Cooper Kupp, I think that says plenty about where Cooper Kupp's at. And I'd be really wary about getting too excited about Cooper Kupp in the coming days when he gets released and finds a new team of his own. 7 more impactful signings to get to, but first, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up. We got loads of rookie content coming your way in the build up to the draft, as well as a constant stream of great guests and best ball shows. We are so close to 3,500. Hit that subscribe button. Coming in at number 7 in the most impactful moves that we've seen so far, it is the upgrades to the Chicago Bears offensive line. Ben Johnson got to Chicago, looked at the offensive line, and immediately said, no way are we going to do this to Caleb Williams. That offensive line ranked 24th in PFF's end-of-year grades. Meanwhile, the Lions, where Ben Johnson had been, they had a top 4 unit. Johnson's seen firsthand the difference a good interior offensive line can make. So rebuilding the Bears' interior offensive line, it was a complete priority for him. They traded for Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney to play guards, then made a splash yesterday adding Drew Dalman to play center. That's an epic amount of upgrades in that time. Now, look, there's a lot of resources been piled into this offensive line, so it needs to perform. But this should help Caleb Williams no end. When not pressured last year, Caleb Williams had 16 passing touchdowns to 2 interceptions. When under pressure, he had only 4 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. This upgrade, it shouldn't stop the Bears from adding draft picks to the offensive line, and it can have a massive impact for both Caleb Williams, but also the running game, which will then take further pressure off Caleb Williams. Number 6, Najee Harris to the Chargers. I've been calling this one out for a while in my written content for Fantasy Pros. It just seemed too obvious. If you know me, I've never really been a Najee Harris truther until last year when the price was kind of finally palatable. Harris, he has had, though, 1,000-yard rushing in every year of his career. He's only had 5 fumbles across 1,200 touches. Last year, he ranked 8th in evaded tackles per touch, 8th in explosive run rate, 11th in yards after contact per attempt. Harris is a player who really depends on the scheme and the offensive line around him. And we've seen that as the Steelers eventually got a bit better in the offensive line department, were better at run blocking, Harris thrived a bit better, and Arthur Smith, for all his faults, helped him to do that. Now, Greg Roman is one of the best run game play callers in the NFL, and this really could open up even more for Harris, particularly as they only have Kamani Vidal behind him. Number 5, Laremy Tunsil to the Commanders. This was a blockbuster of a trade. If you don't have a good left tackle, you are going to struggle mightily in the NFL. And look, the Commanders, they are on a trajectory that it makes sense to make these big swings because Jaden Daniels is so cheap. They did so well last year. You have to try and build them out, and you have to try and see if you can get to the promised land of the Super Bowl. The Commanders got good play out of rookie Brandon Coleman in 2024, who they drafted in the 3rd round. He played at left tackle. But this can take some of the pressure off him. I imagine he moves to right tackle now, and that allows Tunsil to lock down the blind side for Jaden Daniels. Tunsil, he's been a consistent Pro Bowler player over the last few years, and despite the Texans' offensive line struggling, Tunsil remained one of the best pass blocking offensive linemen in the NFL. He had an 88.6 PFF pass blocking grade, that ranked 5th highest among tackles last year. This not only helps Daniels, but it can help the pass catchers, it can help the running backs. I'd love to see the Commanders take a running back early in this draft. Again, open up a bit more for the whole offense. It is, however, a massive worry for the Texans, who had the 29th ranked offensive line in 2024, and now they've moved on from both Shaq Mason and Laremy Tunsil. It's time to pray for CJ Stroud. Number 4, Justin Fields to the Jets. 2 years and $40 million for Justin Fields, and that seems like a good deal all around. This draft class, it likely wasn't going to give the Jets a long-term solution, picking at 7th overall, and $40 million, it isn't starter money over 2 years, but it is a good deal higher than the typical $5 to $10 million you see for good quality backup quarterbacks. Fields, he gets a chance to rejuvenate his career, reunite with Garrett Wilson, the pair played together at Ohio State, and Fields, he hasn't always had the best of environments to play in. But when he had DJ Moore in Chicago, Moore had 96 catches, 1,364 yards, 14.2 yards per catch, and 8 touchdowns. Fields, he can be erratic. It's not always going to be smooth sailing for him, but I like this move for the Jets. It buys him a bit more time to figure out how they want to approach this next phase. And Justin Fields, for all his faults, had 11 top 5 QB weekly finishes over his last 24 starts. That is somebody who was going to be usable in fantasy. He was QB7 weeks 1 to 6 whilst for starter in Pittsburgh. We had multiple games from him where he rushed for 2 touchdowns. That's useful for fantasy football. 3 more players to get to, but if you haven't already, hit subscribe. If you made it this far into the video, I know you're enjoying it. Number 3, DK Metcalf to the Steelers. Pittsburgh gave up a 2nd-round pick and paid DK Metcalf $150 million over the next 5 years to get him onto their team. DK, he said he wanted warm weather and to play for a contender, but $150 million, it helps buy you a lot of warm clothes. The biggest impact here, though, it's going to be what happens now with George Pickens. The team doesn't seem all the way in with Pickens, who said he's off the field issues. He needs a new contract of his own. It's hard to imagine that Pickens is going to look at what DK Metcalf just got paid and want to take less than that. Would the Steelers really want to pay 2 wide receivers $30 million? So I think we can expect that there'll continue to be trade rumors about George Pickens over the next few weeks, all the way up to the draft, with the wide receiver class not being as strong as the last few years. No Arthur Smith wide receiver has ever had more than 119 targets in a season. That's a number DK Metcalf has hit in 4 of the last 5 seasons, and he likely would have done in 2024 if it weren't for injuries. Pickens, as the clear wide receiver 1 in 2024, only got to 103. So it raises a lot of questions about how useful these wide receivers are going to be for fantasy football. We've all enjoyed drafting DK Metcalf over the last few years. The George Pickens truthers have loved drafting him. But with 2 players who play in a similar way, are they really going to be able to combine in an Arthur Smith offense to be that useful for fantasy? Obviously, on top of this, the Steelers, they need a quarterback too, and the current rumors are that Aaron Rodgers looks the likeliest to land there, but Does Aaron Rodgers' conservative game at this point in his career suit the needs of these wide receivers who work extensively in contested catch situations? We know that Aaron Rodgers hates throwing interceptions. So we're looking at a situation where he looks downfield, sees Pickens and DK absolutely fighting with defenders, and instead he just checks it down to Alan Lazard instead. There's a lot to get through in this situation before it's clear enough for me to want to start drafting these Pittsburgh wide receivers. Number 2, Sam Darnold going to the Seattle Seahawks. This one seems to have come down to the finances so much. The Seahawks, they offered Geno Smith the same contract apparently that Sam Darnold took, a 3-year, $110 million deal. And Geno didn't want it. Geno wanted more. But Sam Darnold, he accepted it, and this is where we are now. So Darnold, it's a fairly good deal for him, a decent payday after bouncing around over the last few years, and in theory, some security. But I really wouldn't be surprised in the coming days if we start to see more of the contract details, that it becomes incredibly obvious that there's an easy out after 1 year and definitely after 2 years. But that's okay for the Seahawks. Again, they're another team who are trying to figure out where they're going. They're rebuilding in Mike McDonald's image. We've seen them invest plenty on the defensive side of the ball. With no DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett, it feels like Jackson Smith and Jigba could explode, become the true wide receiver one that we want him to be in fantasy. And Darnold's rhythm and timing play, it should work fine with JSN. But the lack of offensive line, it is concerning. Seattle, they ranked 31st in PFF grades among all teams last year. I really need to see the Seahawks make massive upgrades there before I have a lot of faith in Sam Darnold being able to overcome poor offensive line play. It's just going to be a very interesting situation. But this move, it started the quarterback carousel with Geno moving earlier. And obviously, there were a lot of teams who hoped that Sam Darnold could have ended up with them. Here we are now. But let's move on to number 1, Geno Smith going to the Raiders. Tom Brady, he looked at this rookie quarterback class and was having none of it. And for that, I say, thank you, Tom. Brock Bowers also says, thank you, Tom Brady, because Brock Bowers deserves better than Gardner Minshew. Brock Bowers deserves better than Aiden O'Connell. So did Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers has been a really nice player over the last few years. Last year had some great weeks, particularly for fantasy purposes. And I think that both Bowers and Jacoby Myers are going to have even better seasons this year. This team feels like it could add another solid quality pass catcher. It feels like they could do with that right now. It feels like they need a good running back added to the team to really open up the play action game that Geno Smith thrives in. Pete Carroll, though, he knows Geno Smith. He knows how to get the best of him. So I've got every faith that they are going to add a good running back. Smith, he thrived in Seattle despite woeful offensive line play. We talked about that already. The Raiders, they still need to improve there. Their offensive line wasn't a huge amount better. But Geno, when he kept clean, he was excellent. He was second in catchable throw rate from a clean pocket last year. And that is going to be a massive upgrade for Brock Bowers. And I think that alone is a mammoth upgrade and is going to make a huge impact on the 2024 season. Those are the 10 most impactful moves that we have had so far in the last few days. Obviously, loads more coming over the next few days. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you stay tuned on this channel, and we'll bring you as much news and content as we can and tell you how it affects fantasy football in 2025 and beyond.